Feel good? Ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
All right. Maybe next time we talk about this, you have a victory on this.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Yeah.
So first, tell me about the history of Black Wall Street. What happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma over 100 years ago?
Well, to really talk about what happened, we have to talk about what was Greenwood. Greenwood was the greatest, most organized, most prosperous Black community in the history of this country. And it was a place where people came to be free. They came to own things. They came to have wealth concentration and to have resiliency with themselves. And so at the time of the massacre, which happened in 1921, almost 104 years ago, Greenwood had about 11 to 12,000 residents. You had more Black professionals per capita than any place in the nation. You had more Black millionaires per capita than any place in the nation. You had individuals like J.B. Stratford, who was the richest man in Greenwood, multimillionaire, owned the Stratford Hotel, which was the largest Black-owned hotel in the nation. You had Dr. A.C. Jackson, who was considered the quote-unquote finest Negro surgeon in the nation at the time. You had A.J. Smitherman, who owned the Tulsa Star, which is the first African-American newspaper with a weekly national circulation. So when you put all that together and also understand that Tulsa at the time was the oil capital of the world. So you had a lot of people coming into Tulsa making a lot of money. And it was just that racial tension where you had white supremacy literally on the south side of the Frisco tracks, and you had this Black promised land basically on the north side. And so in 1921, when these white supremacists wanted to take the land, they wanted the valuable land in Greenwood. So they needed a spark to do this, to eradicate the Black community. And they used this rules about Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old shoeshine boy, rumored that he had tried to assault a white woman. How many times have we heard that? All right, very common. Well, when they took Dick Rowland downtown and a mob about 500 to 1,000 whites assembled downtown at the courthouse calling for him to be lynched, there was actually a newspaper editorial said a Negro to be lynched tonight. You had some of the most powerful Black men in Greenwood, like J.B. Stratford, about 100 of them, put on a suit. Many of these are World War I veterans and got their guns, and they went downtown to the sheriff and said, hey, we're here to volunteer to protect Dick Rowland. Now just imagine this scene. You got 1,000 whites calling for the blood of Dick Rowland. You got 100 brothers saying we're here to protect Dick Rowland. You can imagine how crazy that scene was. The sheriff actually said, we don't need your help. You boys go back home. And a white man said to one of the brothers, what are you doing with that gun, nigga? He said, hey, I'll use it if I have to. And he tried to take the gun from him. And a shot ran off and all hell broke loose. The Black men retreated back over the train tracks, back into Greenwood, but this was an open gunfight as they were going. So some of the Black men were killed, some of the white men were killed. The Black men retreating to Greenwood. At this time, this mob, and when I say mob, I want to be clear, this is like a cross-section of Tulsa. These are doctors, these are community leaders, these are business owners. This is not just some hoodlums or vigilantes. These white boys got together and they started attacking Greenwood. They went on for several hours and they were actually stopped by the Black men who had set up these defenses. One of the reasons I'm so proud to be from Greenwood, because they actually fought and protected their men, women, their children and women, and also their property. That fighting lasted into the night and it was a stalemate. Things got kind of quiet between 2 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. And then around 5 a.m. in the morning, there was a big whistle that went out. And then these white men, thousands of them by this time, had organized themselves into companies, like military-style companies, and they invaded Greenwood. And they overwhelmed the defenses. And once they were able to overwhelm the defenses, they were able to just pour into the community by the thousands. When I say by the thousands, this is not me talking. Like the National Guard, who finally came to town, said when they got here, it was 20 to 25,000 whites going crazy in Greenwood. First thing they did was that they stole everything out of the homes. We're talking about valuables. We're talking about furniture, books, money, coats, anything you can imagine. Killing people indiscriminately, raping people, stabbing people, burning people, lynching people, shooting people. And then they burnt everything down. So over 1,550 homes and businesses were burned to the ground. 1,550 homes and businesses. Up to 3,000 people disappeared, never to be heard from again. Those who survived, they were taken into concentration camps in different areas of the city. Bodies being thrown in the river, bodies being thrown in mass graves. Some of these people stayed in these camps for weeks and weeks, and you couldn't leave unless a white employer came and signed you out. And those who didn't have a white employer, they made them work to clean up their community. So they were virtually enslaved. Some people lived in a tent for up to 18 months until they could get some type of permanent housing. Over $200 million in property damage.
Is that in modern day funds?
Modern day funds. That's just the property damage. That doesn't count the business loss. It doesn't count the loss of life or the massive amount of injuries. You're talking about thousands of injuries, not just physical injuries. Can you imagine waking up and having to run for your life, not knowing what's going to happen, never seeing your neighbor again, don't know where your mother is, your home is burnt down? I mean, just like our two living survivors who are both 110 years old, they have lived for 103 years seeing bodies in the street, seeing planes drop bombs, seeing homes that they used to play in and have friends in be burned down to the ground. So just the mental cost of it, the cost is immense.
So where are you from?
I'm from Greenwood.
And Greenwood is in?
It's in North Tulsa, Oklahoma.
How old were you when you learned about Black Wall Street?
Oh, I was 21 years old.
Have you ever seen Greenwood, Black Wall Street mentioned in any of your history books, any history books of a young Tulsan?
No, I did not know anything about it that I recall until I got to the University of Oklahoma. I was sitting in the intro African American Studies class with Dr. Kepler Nurakim. I'm sitting there, I'm an athlete, so I'm trying to be cool. This is a big old guy. He's 6'5", 330. He got locks with a mohawk, booming voice, very intimidating guy. I was trying not to be, noticed. And he started talking about Tulsa and all these black doctors, things I was telling you in this massacre. I raised my hand. I was like, man, doc, I'm from North Tulsa. I'm Greenwood. That's not true. I was so embarrassed because he was so embarrassed for me. Like, how could you not know this? You're from this community. That was in the fall of 1997. That sparked into me a passion and a hunger that's never left to make sure that I could educate and advocate for Greenwood. And my associate's degree is in history. And I'm like, how did I not realize this?
When you think about the access to information about Black Wall Street, how important is that when you try to bridge the access to information to the access to justice?
Very important. I mean, you have to realize, what happened. That's why I appreciate your very first question and saying like what happened and giving the scope and scale. Because I think the thing about Greenwood and the Tulsa Race Massacre, it's not unique that white supremacists burnt down black communities. That happened all over the nation. Tragically to our people, Wilmington, Rosewood, East St. Louis, Atlanta, I can just go on and on and on. But the thing about Tulsa that's so important, that is unique, is the size, scope, and scale of the destruction. We're talking about 10 to 12,000 people. We're talking about 40 blocks, 4 square miles, all the property damage we talked about, but also what that Greenwood means for Black America nationally. The destruction of Greenwood was a destruction of Black economic wealth throughout the nation, and it's something we really have never recovered from. And that's why we always say justice for Greenwood is justice for Black America, for many, many reasons, particularly because we have two living survivors. That's another thing that makes this time period very unique. There's never been a time where you had a historical massacre of our people that happened such a long time ago, and yet you have survivors that are here still breathing and still in the fight.
Yeah. What does justice for Greenwood mean to Mother Randall and Mother Fletcher in 2025?
First of all, it means that they are actually seen as the victims of this horrendous terrorist attack that they are, and giving the resources they need to live out their lives without any wants, right? These people are 110, so they're in relatively good health, but they're 110. They need round-the-clock care. And one of the things that we were able to do at Justice for Greenwood was arrange for them to be in a pretty nice retirement home. But as they're getting older, their needs are getting more and more and more. Plus, from a mental standpoint, they need to know before they close their eyes for the last time that they received justice. I get emotional thinking about it because, as you know, we lost Uncle Red, who was Viola Ford Fletcher's younger brother at 102. And that was very, very important to him as a survivor of the massacre, but also as a World War II combat veteran who could not utilize his GI loan when he came home, who had to work literally 6 days a week on average, most weeks 7 days a week, just to feed his family and get his children through college. It's very important to him as he testified at Congress, don't forget about me. And he said, we're not just black and white pictures. We are flesh and blood, and this happened to us.
Mm.
I think that's why this story resonates so much with all of our people throughout this nation, because these two women are living embodiment of our community, right? Of what we've had to overcome, what we had to endure, our perseverance, our strength, and our still belief that America can be what it says it can be. Well, there is no dispute that the massacre happened. There is no dispute that they were there. There's no dispute that they're suffering the lasting harm. It would just be a travesty of unspeakable, unimaginable consequences for them to pass away without justice.
When you consider justice as their attorney, as long as I've known you, you've been representing the survivors and the descendants of Greenwood. What are you seeking in terms of remedy for this very clearly defined harm on this community?
Right. Justice for Greenwood, first and foremost, looks like compensation to the two living survivors at 110 years old. I mean, that has to happen. And we've made that very clear to the city. And even with our new mayor, Monroe Nichols, who's showing some leadership on this issue, it would be a travesty not only for us and the nation, but for him, for them to down his watch without compensation. Justice for Greenwood looks like a victim's compensation fund to pay for all the outstanding property claims. We can go right down the street and look at the property claims. So we know who these individuals are, we know where they live, we know what they lost, and we know how much money they are owed today. As we state, we cannot have justice for Greenwood if we have these claims just being outstanding. It's not we're not just making up something, right? Justice for Greenwood looks like a scholarship program for verified descendants. This is a program that we believe is going to really help not just the descendants, but the city of Tulsa. Because what we say is, if someone lives here in Tulsa, they're eligible, and this is a scholarship. They can go to college, they can go to vocational school, they can go to trade school. But also, if you're a descendant and you live in Seattle, your hometown, you can come to Tulsa to go to school, and you have eligibility for that scholarship. Justice for Greenwood looks like a grant program. One of the things about Greenwood, Black Wall Street, and Black Wall Street was not like a stock market. It was businesses owned by Black people. And therefore, this business fund should be set up. If you're a verified descendant and you have 51% or more ownership in your company, there should be a grant program that's also providing you consulting so we can create jobs for our community. Justice for Greenwood looks like a grant program for surviving entities. We have 13 surviving churches from the massacre and one school, Booker T. Washington High School. These churches in particular stepped into the gap over this last 100 and almost 4 years when the government did not. They provided funding, they provided care, they provided inspiration and care for the spiritual needs of the survivors and descendants. They should have funding available to them to make sure they can continue to provide that within this community. Justice for Greenwood also looks like a citywide holiday. You know, in this environment that we're living in now in 2025, where Black history is under active attack,
Yeah.
to be silenced, to be eradicated, this city has a responsibility to make June 1st of each year an official city holiday with proper remembrance activities to make sure that this can never be wiped away. Justice for Greenwood looks like a land audit. 3,000 people disappeared. Many of these people own property. So any land that the city owns today, they need to do a land audit and find out, okay, how do I get to acquire this property? And if they acquire this property as a result of the massacre, that property needs to be returned back to that original family or pay that family fair market value. Justice for Greenwood looks like the city releasing all records related to the massacre. We've been in litigation with the city for 4 years to get the records that they have. We don't know everything that they have. We just want everything that they have. And so I am happy that the mayor has already publicly stated that's something he's definitely going to do. And that will be justice because we still only know about 10 to 15% about the massacre because all of the documents, most of them are with the perpetrators. And they've been hiding that. You know, justice for Greenwood looks like building a hospital in Greenwood. You know, Dr. A.C. Jackson, not only was he a great surgeon, but he owned a hospital in Greenwood that serviced the community. It was destroyed. We don't have a hospital in Greenwood. There are about 15 hospitals in the Tulsa area, 0 in the Greenwood area. So we want a level 1 trauma center hospital be built, and we want it to be called the Dr. A.C. Jackson Memorial Hospital. Justice for Greenwood looks like employment preferences. If you are a verified descendant of the massacre and you apply to work at the city of Tulsa, You should have an employment preference, just like if you're a veteran, if you're a Native American. This doesn't mean you're going to automatically get the job. It just means you're going to get a preference. Same for contracting. If a business is owned by a descendant, let's say John Rogers, a descendant of J.B. Stratford, who owns Ariel Investments, and the city is looking for money managers. John Rogers, who is one of the best money managers in America, but when he applies or puts in the bid, he should also receive a preference because he is a direct descendant. It does not matter that he's already successful. The fact is, he's a direct descendant. Justice for Greenwood looks like immunity from taxes, fees, and expenses to the city of Tulsa. So think about this, how unequitable or unjust it is that the city of Tulsa burned down your home, destroyed all your property, destroyed your business, never paid you a penny towards that. But over this last 100 years, you and your family have paid city taxes, have paid for city utilities, have paid for all type of fees to the same entity that owes you money. So it just makes common sense that the city would make you immune from having to pay these things to them over that same period of time. Hey, it's taking you 104 years to pay me what I owe you. I should be immune for 104 years or some type of abatement. And then the last thing Justice for Greenwood looks like is a true criminal investigation into the murders that occurred. We know Dr. A.C. Jackson was murdered, but we also know that right now there is an active crime scene at Oakline Cemetery where they found finally one of the mass graves. And they pulled out of that grave and identified for the very first time in 103 years an individual by the name of C.L. Daniel. C.L. Daniel was a World War I veteran from Noonan, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, was in Salt Lake City, Utah, trying to make his way back home to his mama. We know this because of the letters that we've been able to unearth. His mother heard that he may have been caught up in the Tulsa, as she called it, the riot, but they had no way of figuring it out. They didn't know what happened to him. She could never collect on his insurance, anything, because there's no body. Well, now he's been identified. This is an open crime scene. There's 30 other bodies that are going to be identified by DNA. You cannot have an open crime scene and not do an actual criminal investigation. So those things are what justice looks like, and those things are what Project Greenwood is about. The good news, Angela, is for the first time in 104 years, we believe we have a willing partner in City Hall with Mayor Monroe Nichols, who's already publicly stated that he is very supportive of Project Greenwood and many substantial elements of Project Greenwood.
There are a lot of entities that take on Greenwood as a name for a brand, but I think it's not to be disrespectful. I think they're inspired
That's right.
by what Black Wall Street means and the fact that we have history that says we can come together even economically when it looks like in modern day history we can't. What does it mean to think Greenwood? And what would you encourage people that look like me and you to do to continue the legacy of Greenwood?
Right, right. Excellent question. I want to, on the first part of it, that when people take on the brand and use Greenwood, we don't have a problem with that at all. What we want them to do though is, if you're going to use Greenwood to help your business or your brand, do something for the descendants of Greenwood and the survivors who built the Greenwood. Because sometimes it feels like exploitation when you just use the Greenwood name and story, but you're not doing anything for the survivors and descendants of Greenwood. So that's first. Well, my concept that I'm introducing, to Think Greenwood, is built upon the 5 major pillars that built up Greenwood. And remembering that Greenwood was built in a nadir like we are now, meaning Greenwood was built in a time where Black people were under vicious, consistent, and constant attack from all corners of society. And that's what's happening now. And so to think Greenwood is to say, okay, these are the 5 things that these unbelievable Black people, one generation out of enslavement, built the greatest Black community in the nation. How did they do it? Well, first of all, they had an independent mindset, freedom mind state, as I like to call it. That was the first thing. So thinking Greenwood is having a freedom mind state. Second thing is ownership. They understood to think Greenwood, we need to own our property, own our businesses, own our community. Third thing is to think Greenwood is community love. They love the community so much that a 19-year-old shoeshine boy, Dick Rowland, he was not a somebody. He was not a business owner. He wasn't rich. Yet the fact that he was part of the Greenwood community, and it's about community love, these people put everything on the line to protect his life. And we have to have that same mentality, the same community love. Fourth, we need to be thinking about wealth creation and concentration. This was the principle of Greenwood that's so important that allowed them to be freedom mind state. They had wealth. It's allowed them to have ownership. And the fifth part was resiliency, that these individuals are resilient to go through enslavement, to go through Jim Crow, to go through open white supremacy, violence, lynchings happen all around them, and still have the resilient nature to say, we're going to give it down. We're going to still build up the greatest community ever. And then we're going to defend it. And then when you burn it down, we're going to rebuild it and build it back up. And then, even though many people that built it in the first place either died or had to leave, we're gonna still be resilient. And then when you come through with urban renewal and destroy Greenwood a second time and want to run us out of Tulsa, we're still here. I'm still here. I'm 104 years later. We're still here going, fighting for justice. And that's what it means to think Greenwood, those 5 basic principles. And we need that more than ever in the Black community today. We need to be thinking Greenwood on everything we do. That should be the prism that we want to be looking at everything that we do. And that's the message I'm going to bring to our community.
You talked about how costly this work has been. I know the personal toll it's taken on you doing this work well over 20 years. What do you think the costs have been to continue to try this case, to continue to see justice for the survivors and descendants of Greenwood?
It's been well over $5 million just the last 5 years. When you talk about litigation costs, travel, taking care of the survivors to make sure they have what they need, taking care of descendants, doing all the videos we do oral histories of descendants to keep their stories, make sure that they're preserved forever. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars that we could not do if we didn't get support from individuals and corporations and foundations around the country.
And how can people support the work that you all are doing in just trying to get justice for the survivors and descendants?
The best way to support, they go to projectgreenwood.org and they can make a donation right there. And again, it can be $1, it can be $10, it can be $1,000. Whatever you can do is really helpful. And everything that we do is going towards justice and reparations for the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Justice for Greenwood is justice for Black America.